Hello and welcome to
Absolute Game Off.
Nerd! I am your non-geek, non-nerd host for tonight. Rohan was not able to make it. Some type of cyclone bomb or something on the West Coast has shut down power, and he is with candlelight reading a book, and he's not online, so he couldn't join us today. But we have a special guest, someone I've been very looking forward to meeting and talking with. We have Matrix Comix. That's Matrix Comix from IG, and Matrix, welcome to the show.
Hey JP, thanks for having me. Glad to be here. Been looking forward to chatting about comics. I'm pretty active on Instagram, and I've been on a few YouTube shows with Bird the Nerd, uh, and always sort of in the chats on a lot of like Beyond Wednesdays and back with Lords of the Long Box back in day with TiVo, RIP, and Cover Price and all that. So always active on IG, commenting on YouTube. But when I get a chance to jump on YouTube and chat with people about comic books, I'm going to take it. So thanks for the invite.
Yeah, I mean, I found you on Instagram. That's where we started chatting, and we have a similar, like for the Copper Age horror is where I believe that the first probably a Crow book you had, a Crow Faust book might have been something that was posted,
Yeah,
so that intrigued me at that point, and
yeah.
I wanted to have you on for something that Rohan is not on to help have a conversation with, but we can get into that later, but. Rohan likes to keep a tight ship. So he always says, let's start with the origin story. So tell us how things began for you collecting comics or where the love for it became or began.
Yeah, and again, sorry to miss Rohan. So, Rohan, when you see this, cheers to you, bud. Enjoy your interviews and JP's interviews. So, sorry to miss you, but cheers. And um, of course, I've been watching you guys' interviews, and as I mentioned this backstage, I'm really impressed with how consistent you all have been with your interviews, with who you all bring on. It seems like you all have a really broad reach into what's happening in the community. You're having different people come on who, some people who just like found a comic book collection and now they collect comic books, or people who have been in the game for a long time. It's really really cool to see what you guys are doing. So just shout out to you guys, and as a consumer of content, I appreciate what you all have been doing. Um, as far as my origin story goes, for me, I was thinking about
And
this because you
we
guys,
thank you for watching.
yeah, no worries. I was thinking about this because you guys, asked this for everybody. I'm a child of the '90s. As I think most people who have been, some people who have been on your show are kids of the '90s, and I was a active participant in the multimedia assault that was, Fox Kids, Wizard Magazine, Toys R Us, commercials, KB Toys, Fleer, Marvel Flair trading cards, Fleer Ultra trading cards, holograms. Give me more holograms, and I'll get into that later on. Because I was a sucker for the gimmicks. I loved it, and it was something that I came across because as I was consuming these cartoons on Saturday mornings, as I was watching the Power Rangers after school, I was inside watching these shows, which was a good thing in some ways because I actually grew up in a very, very rough neighborhood in Texas, and it was the streets were rough. You had to watch your back. You couldn't wear certain colors. If you could have
Oh
you
wow.
couldn't have too nice of shoes because somebody might say, "Hey, I like your shoes. Give those to me." And you'd have to fight. And so it was a pretty rough sort of neighborhood in terms of what was going on around my block. But luckily I had a really great, amazing family, an amazing older sister, and um, being inside watching those cartoons was better than being out in the streets running around and getting in trouble. And
Yep.
so my dad really started to notice this, and my dad was big on hobbies. He always he grew up a lot of hobbies, sort of like um, building model cars and spray painting the model cars and getting the pieces of the engine. So we would build models a lot. But as I kind of started to get more into cartoons and the comic books that they were showing, my dad was like, "Hey, let's go to a comic book shop. Let's take you to a comic book shop and get you some comics." And so we went to. There wasn't too many LCSs around us, but we had to drive about 30 minutes to the closest one, and went in there, and it was the sweet spot, man. Wizard One had just hit the newsstands. My comic book shop guy was like, "Hey, if you're just getting into comic books, this is a good magazine to look into." So I was there. I was the ground zero when Wizard One hit, and X Men was at its peak, and I was starting to consume um, all that content. But honestly, for me, it was Wizard Magazine that um, really kept my attention. I loved reading the articles. I loved seeing what toys were coming out.
Did,
And
did you like the they used to have the artwork from the readers. I don't know if the first issue had that, but later issues you would have artwork from certain readers in the magazine. So I would kind of compare my artwork that I did to who was published in their book there. I don't know if you remember
exactly,
those ones.
exactly. They'd have the envelope artwork, and then they'd have the full pieces that they'd have and rank, and the grand prize winner would get a statue of Lady Death, or
Oh yeah.
or a signed whatever comic book, and it was so cool. And I remember all those pieces too because I would just pour over all those Wizard magazines. And so for me it was a multimedia thing. I was buying toys. I was really heavy into Marvel cards, and even at that young age, I never opened my toys. I kind of kept them in box, and
Oh wow.
I would just kind of set them up in my room just to serve as a display, like you have in your background. I
Hmm.
was doing that when I was like 11, 12 with like unopened, X-Men toys and stuff. Um, but comic books weren't like necessarily the focal point at the very beginning. It was everything. And like you mentioned, as yourself making drawings as a kid and looking at what was going on, I grew up in a household where arts was encouraged, and my mom, God rest her soul, would get me art supplies and sit me down, and I look at my comic books, and she say, "Hey, draw these comic books, and let me show you how to do that, and let me get you some tracing paper and trace over your comic books." And so I really got into comic books that way through the artwork. And so I wasn't necessarily reading the comic books even early on. For me, it was the artwork, what was happening in it, what was I drawn to. This was of course in the '90s, so you had that really airbrush like color palette that came in that was everything was kind of chrome, especially with like Image Comics, and it had that real soft
Oh yeah.
sort of shading that happened. So I grew up with that, and I really loved all that. So that was kind of my entry point into buying comic books, which was really the artwork, so that I could test my skill, my drawing skill, and also see what was happening in terms of page layout, splash pages, the double covers, that would come out, the wraparound covers, so all that stuff.
Yep.
So that's really where I was at, and I loved when Chromium hit with Bloodsport, not Bloodsport, what was the Valiant number one,
Yeah.
uh,
Man,
Bloodshot,
I just
Bloodshot,
had those. I got. Oh man.
it was
I know
Bloodshot,
it was Bloodsport, but it
Bloodshot
was
number one. Had
Bloodshot.
the chromium, yeah, had the chromium, and I loved all that stuff. So it was really just like the visual nature of comic books, and the different aspects of the gimmicks of holograms and whatnot. So that's really how I got into it, and then I just stayed into it for a while as a teenager, but eventually, of course, I think like most of your guests, I got busy in high school. I started partying and having a really good time. And but I wasn't buying comic books so much, but I was always buying toys. If I saw like a pack of cards out, I'd always buy it and see if I could pull like a a special card or something. But I always kept up with Wizard though. I kept up with Wizard for a very very long time, just to see what was happening and what was going on. And that was kind of like the majority of how it started for me.
Hmm. Now, I had two questions. The first one is, what you said now your family was very artistic in how things were done at your house. Now, is that why your dad took you initially to the comic book store? Because he was into them, or he was into art as well as your mother?
No, it was just that him seeing the fact that I was like really excited about the X-Men cartoons and I was buying X-Men toys, and he was like, "Hey, those are comic books. You should let's go to the comic book store then if you're interested in that." And getting me involved in comic books. He was just really happy for me to have a hobby, that wasn't, you know, gang banging. It was anything
Yeah.
other than that. So, uh,
But
and, and
he didn't have a collection himself, correct? Or did
no,
he?
no, 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 nobody in my family collected comic book stuff. He was just happy to see me happy, and so I just came about where the comic book, again, it was the peak of the '90s, and so my local comic book shop was, hey, well, my local comic book dealer guy was like, if you're buying comic books, you should really get bags and boards for them. You want to keep them mint, you want to keep them in good shape, and so that was really impressed upon me at a young age of everything has to sort of be mint, and which is probably why I never opened my toys because they had to be mint, and and I wanted to keep them perfect, in their perfect little boxes, which isn't too far off from what people, we do now with slabs and whatnot. It's really this kind
Yeah.
of same thing.
See, I didn't have I collected. I was an '80s kid, so I might be a little bit older than you, but I definitely was in that peak of comic collecting in the '90s. But the '80s, I played with the toys, GI Joe, Star Wars. I never thought to keep them, mint on card back then. But I try to keep them pristine. Like when I would set them up, they had to stay in a certain way, and my dog got to them, and it would tick me off that the dog would eat the foot of Luke Skywalker or something. So I definitely want to keep them nice, but there was like my brother who would like put them in the mud and,
Yeah.
take the trucks and stuff and run them over. And kids are different, but I was probably more like you were, very particular about them. And then when I got into the '90s for collecting, it was the same way. All the comics had to, I didn't like, I didn't like to mess up that cover. And
Yeah.
I was a cover buyer too, just like you. I bought them so I could trace or try to draw how that particular artist made that pose, because that's a hard thing to try to figure out. Where does the arm go when Spider-Man's swinging through New York City? And McFarlane did that better than anybody else. So I would use his artwork, and that's what I would go through the pages. I would read some of them, but I was more interested in what he did drawing wise inside the artwork, inside the pages. So I totally understand that. And I get a lot of grief from some people that say you have to read the stories, you're missing out, blah blah blah. So
I
I
couldn't be
get that.
bothered, man. I couldn't be bothered with the stories, especially. I mean, even Spawn. Those first like 8 to 10 issues of Spawn are like, if you're like a 12-year-old, you're like, what is happening here? Like it wasn't necessarily something that was like the most cohesive storyline for like a very young kid. So it's just like, wow, this looks cool. Let me look at it.
Oh yeah.
But like most people, I definitely got caught up in the Image and Valiant. God, remember how expensive Valiant comics used to be? Valiant comic books, those like gold logo ones. My local guy would have them like $100 in 1994, 1993. Like they were so expensive, man.
I don't remember the gold ones. I have the chromium covers you talked about. I Two things, like there's many little things I'm trying to collect here. Spider-Man Run. My Dave Stevens Golden Age Good Girl stuff. But two things related to the '90s are my Image Comics newsstand. I'm trying to find as many of those first issues of like Savage Dragon, Wildcats, Team 7, Pit, Stormwatch, all of them newsstand number ones, as many as I could find. And the other is the chromium covers from Valiant, Exo Man of War,
The sickest
is it
one.
Psylord?
The sickest one. Exo Man of War Zero. That has the
Yeah,
sickest chromium cover, dude.
best
That
cover.
Raptor cover
I have like
by Joe Quesada, so sick.
it was my that cover and Exo Man of War. I think it's 13 or 14, where him and Turok are on the cover,
Yeah.
and it's a I think it's Bob Layton or I think it's Bob Layton that did that cover. It's fabulous. It's a great cover. Those two are my favorite Exo Man of War covers, and I was way more of a fan of him than Iron Man back then because I thought Valiant was so cool. You had Bloodshot, you had Shadow Man, another one that was cool, but Exo Man of War and Magnus Robot Fighter were my two favorite. So I didn't find them. They were so popular, at least at that short period of time, that they were hard to find.
Man,
And to this day, you can't find an Exo Man of War number one that easily. I mean, it's not one that was mass produced, so it's a hard one to find. I'm sure you can get it on eBay, but you're not going to be going through a bunch of long boxes and find it. You'll find a bunch of Shadow Man and a bunch of Exo Man of War, 6 through 20, but you're not going to find those first couple issues. So they,
listen,
I don't,
that Exo Man of War Chromium number 0 goes so fucking hard. It's one of the best like gimmick covers, period. So 100% agree with you on that. Out of those Image newsstands, Pit One newsstand is on my watch list. I would love a 9.8 Pit One newsstand because it looks so sick. Del Keown is obviously the man.
yeah,
Um, Youngblood does not have a newsstand edition, but does have a second print edition, which is a little harder to find. Has a gold border around it,
okay, yeah,
which is pretty interesting. Um, Man, yeah. So that Valiant stuff was like I came into that, and I loved that Valiant stuff. I just loved all the gimmick covers. It was so great. That Solar Man of Adam, like
yep.
3D or like Sparkle. I don't know what it's like Solar Vision comic book where you had to have the glasses.
And I think they were so popular that they just weren't available. Like the Exo Man of War, I don't remember seeing him. That and another one, not to get too far off the subject, but Omega Man was not an easy find for me back in the day, but I thought he was a cool character. Exo Man of War, I have a pretty good, collection of it, but the first couple issues I couldn't find. The Chromium ones, I have a bunch of the Exo Man of Wars, but that whole run of Valiant, um, Robot Fighter, all that stuff. There were so many Chromium covers. That's a cool thing to, in my opinion, to collect. But then you mentioned the gold ones, and mine are all silver, and the Exo Man of Wars in silver. And I know you reminded me that there's gold ones that are probably even way harder to find, and so
Yeah,
that would be on my watch list.
and don't forget that Exo Man of War and Iron Man did a combo comic book together called Heavy Metal, and they teamed up in this comic book, and it's amazing. It came with a hologram card. It's fantastic. Um,
I'm gonna have to look it up now while you're
yeah, yeah.
What's it called again?
It's called Heavy Metal. Exo Man of War and Iron Man, polybagged with a sick hologram card. Um, it's a great crossover in my opinion. So you see that. So I came into again at the peak as a kid into all that, the Valiant hype, the Image hype, the Wizard hype. It was all there. It was perfect timing. But sort of getting to what I'm looking into now and where I'm at now as a collector, you know, back then I remember, of course, Evil Ernie and Lady Death all over Wizard magazine, right? They were
Yep.
they were doing inserts. They both had Lady Death half issue and Evil Ernie half edition. You get the mail in to get those, which I did all the time, and I love those issues. And by the way, those Wizard half issues, how undervalued are those things? They were shipped in manila envelopes, no backing board, and could only be gotten if you sent in a money order, that your mom had to get you from 7-Eleven. 9/8 in those should be revered. And I see them on eBay going for pennies, and I'm like, I pick them up for the ones that I like, because I'm like, you couldn't just get these like perfect condition. Anyways, um, you
Well,
know, so
there was a bunch of those at the time. You're talking about the Wizard half, right?
yeah, the Wizard half. You had to send in the the envelope and with the money order, and they sent you the comic book 4 to 6 weeks later, if in whatever condition it came in. Those are fantastic. I
Yeah,
love those.
I
But
had I had a what was his name? Geez, David Keith drew him.
Max,
Max. I had the half of Max.
yeah,
So
yeah, those are all sick, man. I'm sure a lot of people who are out there remember those and have a lot of love for those. But Evil Ernie and Lady Death were all over the place, and Wizard. The thing was that I couldn't find. I never saw the original Eternity Evil Ernie comic books in my local comic shop, and I knew that even then it was a sort of legendary book. And I asked my comic book shop guy about it, and he said, "Well, I can't say that comic book. It's not supposed to be for kids." And I was like, "But he's in Wizard. I can see it in Wizard." He's like, "Yeah, I can't really sell it to you." Now you have to think about this though. I'm in the South, in a very conservative state, and it was they're serious about that, and it was a big deal at the time for um, um, my shop to have certain books, and I'll get into this later on when I talk about specifically Copper Age horror. But this is the beginnings of it for me because I was so enthralled with Evil Ernie because it was like, why can't I see him? Why can't I like participate in this? Like, what's so crazy about it? But during that time, Chaos Comics was, of course, having
yeah,
its amazing run, and you couldn't go to a comic book shop without seeing a book from Chaos Comics, and I started to buy those Evil Ernie books and those Lady Death books, and I'd read like Evil Ernie, versus like superheroes, which is this one shot book where he just kills all these superheroes that look like Marvel and DC characters, but Evil Ernie is a psychopathic, telepathic teenager who has the power to do whatever he wants. So he just like rips these people apart. And I just read that book. I read all the Chaos books, and I really loved it. And that was just before I got out of comic books when I started to sort of just be a teenager who got way too drunk with his friends. I just kind of that was like the last place that I stopped like buying comic books, reading comic books, and really enjoying what I was reading because I never really connected with superheroes. I could give a shit about ASM 300. I don't care about GSX1. I don't care about like AF 15. I really do not care about any of those books. And I know like people love them obviously,
oh yeah.
but to me, I don't care about them. And it's not something that like I find interesting for a few reasons, and I could talk about later. But even as a teenager, I just wasn't drawn to them. It was more about this forbidden fruit that was like these sort of violent comic books that I don't know. Maybe in hindsight, violence wasn't anything that was new to me, right? Because of how I was growing up in my neighborhood, and so maybe it felt more grounded and it felt more real, than Spider-Man swinging around, his city. I don't know,
I mean, I get it. I mean, at that time, everything was becoming desensitized for kids. I mean, you had O.J. Simpson on the
yeah,
news, and all that stuff was happening. The movies were more graphic than they had been before, and I didn't live in a neighborhood like you're talking about. But I mean, add that on top of your neighborhood, and that makes sense that it made that why Evil Ernie and that type of genre was more satisfying to you.
yeah, yeah. And this is a bit of again sort of like hindsight pop psychology, but um, it was, but also the fact that I think at the base of it, the fact that me and my dad connected, going to the comic book shop, he'd take me to sports card like sort of trade shows. I went to the Wizard. Remember Wizard did like a Wizard tour. They did like it was like a Comic Con, but it was sponsored by Wizard Magazine. It was a Wizard World Tour, and it came to my city in Texas, and I went to that, met Stan Lee,
Oh
got
wow.
autographs from him as a kid. Yeah, it was really fantastic. So it was something that me and my dad did together. So that's really like the base of my connection to comic books, and sort of its nostalgic nature. But you know, now as came back into comic book collecting, maybe like in 2017, 18, I kind of started dabble back into it. I maybe bought one or two comic books every few months, sort of just as oh, I remember this comic book, let me buy that. Really random type stuff.
Now,
Uh,
real quick, did you have your collection still, or did you get rid of it, or did you go back in and grab that collection and then start picking up some new pieces?
I had comic books that I only had maybe like two short boxes of comic books as a kid that I kept, but some of those comic books I actually picked up at a garage sale um, for like 50 cents each, and it was books like ASM 238, with the tattoos,
Oh wow.
Omega Men 3, a few copies of that, and I got those because I read Wizard all the time. I knew that those were valuable comic books, right? And
Yeah.
so I grabbed those comic books along with a few other comic books, but I was mostly just kind of grabbing, like I had like Beavis and Butthead comic books. I had
Hmm.
this series from Innovation comic books called Ralph Snart comic books, which was kind of like this gross out comic book. I had all kinds of stuff. I had some X-Men stuff. It was just a hodgepodge of stuff with a few comic books like ASM 238 that I knew were a little more valuable. Those were always at my parents' house. It wasn't something that like I knew they were there, but it wasn't like a stash of like Golden Age I had like
Right.
from my grandpa or something. It was just a few kind of things, but a lot of but again, I had like every Wizard magazine, so I have like more short boxes of Wizard magazine and like Toy Fair and stuff. Than I had almost more than comic books that I had.
But you don't see those. I mean, those Wizard magazines. I mean, a lot of people threw them out or they got messed up. So to have those, I think, are like it's going back in time just as much as a comic book.
Oh
So
yeah, oh yeah, yeah. It's great to go visit. So those were there, but it wasn't anything serious. And I just kind of again just kind of dabbled, started getting back in 2017. I'm sure because of like I was watching the movies and I was like being reminded of a few things, and I was just buying like a few books here and there. It wasn't anything.
what was it? So 2017, 2018. That's Endgame times, I believe.
Yeah, yeah, that's around that time.
So did those, or was there something? Was there other movies that at the time? Because I know Vin Diesel did a Bloodshot. They had a couple of those Valiant Image, or Spawn had a movie back in the '90s that but it was it Marvel that brought you back in? I guess is more the question.
I think during that time, yeah, but it was also like you always been a big fan of The Crow. I see your copy there behind you. Um,
Yep.
so that was something I always knew was a comic book. But see during college though, before I got back into where in 2017, 2018 to where I'm at like now, like full blown like comic fucking nerd. Um, I um I love The Crow. I knew it was a comic book, and when I was in college, when I got to college, many years ago, I read like I went back and I read the trades. I read Watchmen like for the first time as a college student and melted my mind, right? I was like, oh my God, this is like actually where I needed to be at. I reread The Dark Knight. Around that time I was in college. The Walking Dead was just out like as a comic book. So I got the trade of that. I read The Walking Dead. That was great. So I was kind of reading like again the sort of um I don't know, independent stuff. I was
Yeah.
other than the Dark Knight, but I was kind of more into that. So that kind of planted the seed. I think later on when I started to get heavily into comic books in 2019, where I was like, okay, like I bought like a few things here and there. I bought like some random X-Men books that I wanted, just that I had, maybe ones that I wanted when I was a kid, just to have. Um, But then 2019, I really started to sort of get into more of like horror comic books, a lot more supernatural stuff, thinking about Evil Ernie. And I remember seeing Evil Ernie then. Yeah,
I was gonna. I didn't. You said Eve Ernie, so I didn't. The first part I didn't hear you, but yeah, you got. You were saying you got back into Eve Ernie. Okay.
yeah, I got back on Evil Ernie, but I couldn't really. At that time, I looked up the comic book and it was fairly expensive. It was like a Evil Ernie One Eternity book at that time was like $300, which is a
Yep.
deal now, but like a mint condition one. But for me then, as a yet to be realized comic book collector, $300 was a lot of money. I was like, no way I'm gonna spend that much money on comic book. But I started to get into it, and eventually, got a little more heavy. Started buying a few things, um, and then I kind of got into the spec game a little bit with Blade, because by 2019 I was consuming comic book content. Blade had been announced in 2019 that there was supposed to be a movie with Marshall Ali that was supposed to come out
Yep.
already. And
Five
I
years
was
ago.
like, oh, let me start to get involved a little bit more in the comic books. And around that time, I had started my Instagram and started watching YouTube, and got on the whole train. So by
What
the
were
time
the
20 came
YouTube?
around in the pandemic, I was kind of half speculating on Blade and Supernatural, and half starting to buy some horror comic books that I kind of wanted to get. That I had been looking at.
Now, so what YouTube were you watching then? Who was your people?
Um, it was Lords of the Long Box actually. When Mikey Sutton was still on there, he was known as the Black Knight at that time, which was this whole alter ego he had as a scooper. And it was TiVo and those guys, Solo Wookie. Um, Watching them, Lords of the Long Box channel, and really getting involved with what they were talking about, which was super fun.
Oh yeah, it was Comic Tom and it was Lords of the Long Box that started me. I found Lunch Money Comics. That's why Mike and I and with Rohan are all friendly now because of his show. He's doing what I like to do is that hunting of books. But Devo, Lords of the Long Box were great speculation books about stuff you would never see.
Yeah, yeah.
And,
I was really into it. I really started to get into at that time. I was really because I kind of had got into the spec game with Blade, and I loved the supernatural anyways, and I loved Blade. He was probably one of the few characters that like I would read certain issues or follow up with what he was doing because I loved the '90s movies so much. Uh, and,
all of
and
them.
and Blade 2 was fantastic film by freaking Guillermo del Toro. Um, and
You
so
like all three though? The whole trilogy was good for you.
yeah, I liked all three of them, but two's the best. Two was
Right.
two was fantastic.
Well, one you can't beat that beginning scene, the techno dance scene was probably one of the best in all of movies, in my opinion. That
No,
was
really, really, really great. Yeah, really fantastic. And so plus I'm kind of like a goth kid at heart still, so I was kind of always drawn to the supernatural sort of realm of at 2019, like part of Marvel. Um, so I was already sort of getting into Tomb of Dracula, Werewolf by Night, Man Thing way before the sort of news started to come down that MCU was going to start to move in that direction. But I was picking up books like that. I was really getting heavy into it. And that's around the time I started to work with Key Collector for the first time. I had written uh, I had submitted 10 books for a supernatural spec list. And so I was sort of calling out a few spec books, blew up a few of them. And Nick over at Key Collector and I had he liked what I had written and pulled together. And I was happy to work with him. And he was cool to let me kind of say what I wanted to say. And since then we've since 2020 we've kind of worked together. Kind of every Halloween essentially I pulled together for the past 4 years. some sort of list. So the first 2 years was a supernatural spec list, and then that was like books that were involving characters like Werewolf by Night, like Elsa Bloodstone, like the Legion of Monsters, and I was kind of just pointing out, like, hey, this is something to look out for. And there are still a few books on those lists that I think are still really good plays. But around 2021, I just was like, with Marvel and the mainstream, it was like it was sort of too easy for me. And if you wanted if you want a Tomb of Dracula one, if you want again an ASM 300, you can get it. You just need money. That's all there is to it. You want a 9.8, you can find a 9.8 in those books. You want a clean raw copy, you can find a clean raw copy. And I kind of got disillusioned with this sort of sense that like those are the books that you have to have. Uh, and I kind of started to draw away from the sort of Bronze Age horror or even like talk of pre-code even, because that's not something I was going to get into because I just couldn't. But eventually,
Why not pre-code? Just because of the pricing or the difficulty finding it?
I mean, all of it. I mean, both of those, obviously, and I just I appreciate it for what it is, and I know what it is. But as I started to look into more horror aspects in comic books and started to delve back into Evil Ernie uh, when he was being published by Eternity Comics, um, I started to find other comic books that were around the time that that first Evil Ernie series was published, around 89, 90, 91, 88. Basically the Copper Age from 84 to about 1998. And I started to get into some of these publishers like Eternity, like North Star Publishing, um, like Aircell. Your previous guest talked about Aircell Comic Books. It's a Canadian publisher that was publishing independent books and had some great horror titles with it. But I just started to find these other books that weren't being talked about, or really looked at. Um, because at the end of the day, I'm more about rarity. I'm more about having a one of one. I'm about establishing um, a market for what I think are overlooked artists and amazing indie publishers that happen in the Copper Age. I don't know if you've come across these books. I know that you said that you've seen my Instagram feed and you picked up a few of them. What books have you seen? And I mean, so if you've seen some of these books, they have a certain style to them, a certain look to them. They're just different from what was happening at the time.
And the interesting thing about those books is that the ones that you showcased, and I brought up your list. It's Copper Age Horror 2 is
Mhm.
what showed up. I can't log in on my laptop here, but on my phone I can log back into
Oh, if
e.
if I can present, I have it sort of pulled up here. Is that cool?
Yeah, if you can bring it up. Yeah,
Yeah,
if you can you present on the screen?
yeah,
Okay. So, but all those comics, the covers alone, if I would have found those in a long box somewhere, I would have grabbed them because they're all striking covers, right? They're not ones that you would brush over, right? And that's the cool part about a lot of those because I'm a cover buyer, and that's what the books that you've showcased, the Crow books, Faust, um, you name them, they just had a very telling story on the cover. Now, in some cases, like Gore Shriek #1, I think it's Gore Shriek #1, the first Capullo cover, the stories inside aren't as good as the cover itself, from what I understand. I didn't read them all into there, but I've talked to a couple friends that have been read through Gore Shriek and said it looks horrifying on the cover, but the inside story is not the same. But that's not why I'd buy it. It's just the fact that they're so off-putting. They're a cool thing to have. So you don't see those in long boxes very often. You'll see a bunch of even the chromium covers from Valiant. You'll find those. You'll find Valiant. You'll find the Image everywhere. But you know, Evil Ernie, any of those are usually harder to find from the 90s. Any Lady Death, um, just not an easy thing to find. They're just they are rare in their own sense, but rarity doesn't always attribute to value, but that's not important.
Well, that's the thing. And can you see Can you see what I'm sharing here?
Not yet. No, nothing yet.
Oh, let's see.
I wonder if I have to invite you to share, maybe. No.
Let's see. Let me try one more time here. Can you see that?
No, nothing's coming up yet.
Oh, it's funny. I can see it on my side. I don't know if it's maybe it's just already being seen on StreamYard. I'm not sure.
Yeah, I'm not. Mirror touch up. And I might be able to share mine. You want to do the.
Yeah, yeah. Let's see if you can share yours.
Let me see if I can share the screen here. Uh, let's see.
Yeah,
All
there
right.
you go.
Okay, so this is the Copper Age 2.
Yeah, yeah. I messaged Nick. The Copper Age one. I saw that it had an issue, but that's fine. Both categories can be found on Key Collector, but yeah. And I had just written some stuff, but so
And
basically,
real quick though, I can see your information on these is way more than Key Collector even puts on any of this. So I find that the best part of it, as much that the list itself, but also, this is chapter 3 of the saga of victims, like featuring early covers from industry veteran, like those things that Key Collector doesn't get into anywhere near that amount of information. So it's really cool.
yeah, that's the thing I was saying, that Nick has been really great about allowing me to share my thoughts and write and do in-depth research on these books and why they're important and why I mean I he allowed me to start my own category on the app, which is the Copper Age horror category. So I kind of have I've been able to add to that and do research on these books. So the thing about these books and the thing about Copper Age horror that I love is that pre-code horror, as cool as it is, those artists and that publisher were doing what they thought would sell the best. They wanted to make art that drew kids in, and they wanted to make something that sold off of those racks. Eventually, they pushed it a little too far, and of course, as we know, got caught up with the seduction of the innocent and the trials that happened. But because of those trials, nobody went to jail. Nobody was found guilty of anything. They had to establish a comic book code that we all know, Comic Book Code Authority. But when you get to when you fast forward that 40 years into 1980s America, you have in the mid 80s you have the Satanic Panic happening. You have
Was that the Salman Rushdie stuff?
That was where conservative America thought that Satanism was rampant amongst America and trying to take your kids and brainwash your kids to listen to heavy metal and worship Satan and all these things. That was a real deal, right? You had the Night Stalker killer, who was a serial killer in California, I believe. I can't remember his name, but he had the pentagram carved in his hand or drawn on his hand and during trial. Ramirez was his last name.
Okay.
You have and this is in the 80s. You have the rise of heavy metal. You had Kiss in the 70s, but in the 80s you're starting to get pretty dark stuff for the time. Even Metallica was starting to sort of get popular at the time. Also, and I'm just giving context here for why I think I think Copper Age horror was birthed out of this culture. You had the rise of VHS tapes and bootleg horror films from Italy. Movies like Zombie that came out. There were disgusting and maybe stuff that people haven't seen before. If you remember those VHSs, Faces of Death. I think everybody remembers those, right?
Traces of Death was the real video, whereas Faces was reenactments.
You see what I mean? And you know this because you followed it.
Every Friday we rented Traces of Death and we would watch it, and My buddy and I would watch, horror movies and laugh at certain aspects of it. If you ever, what was the one movie? Not Evil Dead, but it was Dead Alive.
Oh, Dead Alive, sure. Peter
With
Jackson.
the lawnmower scene at
Yeah,
the
Peter
end.
Jackson did that. Yeah, with yeah, of course. Yeah, that's
And the
ridiculous.
baby. They had the baby in
The
there
baby,
that,
yeah, the baby.
so
With
we
like, I think that had like the most blood ever used on screen. I think.
had to
Um,
be. Had to
yeah,
be.
yeah. So you had that happening during the '80s, right? But again, all of that sort of mixing together in this culture, and underneath all of that, you had these independent publishers that were starting to come out of comic books. They were birthed from the '70s underground comic books that were happening in California. But now you have this movement to independent publishers and independent artists, and these artists had something to say. They weren't making work necessarily to like sell the most books. Some of these books you're showing now, Victims Number Three and The Thane, sure, these are from these may be a little more almost mainstream, especially Dark Horse. But for the most part, you had artists who were trying to say something and had a story to tell that almost was against the mainstream. And I'm just really interested in and fascinated by these artists who pushed taste at a time when things were being censored. And you have someone here, you have Tim Vigil here, who I think is really the godfather of outlaw underground horror, known for Faust and Grips. Um, um, Very violent, very heady, beautiful penmanship. Here he's doing a early incentive cover from London Night. This is a 1 in 10 retailer cover from 1992. A 1992 1 in 10 platinum cover. A pretty tough book to find, and no 9/8 on the census. These are the kind
Yeah.
of books that I think um, are valuable, not just like money wise, but they mean something to underground culture. Um, Nightmares on Elm Street #6. This was the last issue published by Innovation for this particular series. And as I mentioned in my write up there to the right, after 1992, Freddy is gone from comic books until 2015. And this is a very very hard to find issue. No 9/8s, only two 9/6s on the census. This book is comparable to Freddie's first cover appearance on Fright 3, which is really a great book to have. This is just a tough book to find for a mainstream character. Um, and so it's books like this that I find really fascinating because they're hard, you can't go buy a 9/8 because there are no 9/8s. You know,
Right.
you can't find these books on a wall at conventions because most people can't find them. Period. This book right here, if you don't mind stopping on Superfly, but
Yeah.
you have something you want to say?
Yep. Go ahead. Now I want to hear about this one because it's pretty cool cover.
So listen, I had something queued up here on my computer to show to present it because it's an important part of this book. Um, but
Do you
maybe
want to
if you have,
send it to me on Instagram and I can maybe show it on the screen?
let me I can send it to you in the chat. How about that?
Okay. Yeah.
Let me do this real quick because yeah, see that chat right there?
Let's see if it.
So if you could play that video, it's a trailer for a documentary, very much tied to this book. And then if you watch that trailer, and then I'll talk about this book because this book right here is one of the most important books in comic book history. And actually, the trailer will sort of go into why that is.
Okay. Let's see if I can. Do you see it? No, it doesn't come on there. Let me stop sharing the screen, and I will. Once I don't know if you'll be able to hear it though on here. but let's see if I can stop sharing. And then I will do this again. Should be that. No, it's not. 1 second here. Some people are better at this than others.
No worries, you can edit this out.
Let's see. Present. Let's see, window. There we go. All right, you can see it now, right?
Yeah.
Okay, so I'm going to play this.
Horror and crime comics.
Is this right?
That kid.
Yep.
And if it's a bad one, the kid is a massive jangled nerves by the time he's through it.
We have to buy them underground. It was like a minor version of, where do you get your dope?
The whole point of underground comics was to break taboos. I mean, that's why they were made. Nothing was off limits. That we had artistic freedom. I think by the time Mike Diana was creating World Angel, that's what he believed.
I felt like things should be a step above the underground comics that I had seen in the past.
A one-time suspect in the Gainesville murders faces obscenity charges. Michael Diana.
Diana publishes a magazine called Boiled Angel.
A comic book filled with sadism. You really have pushed the envelope. I'm sorry. Envelope pushing winner right here.
The prosecutors don't want to acknowledge me.
This hardcore, psychopathic material.
I knew right away that what I was looking at was obscenity. Mike Diana had the unfortunate circumstance of having satisfied all of the standards.
Would you like to get beat up?
He's the nicest man I've ever known. My dad pulled me aside and he said, "That's the Gainesville murderer! I saw him on TV!"
It's your danger to society. And I had always thought I had the freedom to draw whatever I wanted to.
What happened to him was so profoundly wrong, and why the First Amendment is necessary and what it means. I just didn't like some of these drawings myself. But to want to put somebody in jail for 3 years for drawing pictures is crazy. That in the history of America, one American artist has been found guilty of obscenity for his own work. It should be taught in every school.
I believe his desperation was Satan.
Available now on video on demand.
Yeah.
That's interesting.
So if you can go back to the Key Collector app, but so that's Mike Diana. He's the only artist in American history to be charged and jailed with obscenity because of a comic book zine that he put out as a very young adult in 1988. In the state of Florida, where he lived, the zine was available through mail order. The FBI was investigating serial killings in a small county in Florida. When they pulled over one of the suspects of these serial killings, they found a zine from Mike Diana in this guy's possession. Admittedly, Mike Diana makes very, as you can see, sort of obscene work, but that's his right. And the FBI at that time cleared Mike Diana as being a suspect of these serial killings because when they saw his magazine, they thought that any person who would make this kind of work has to be guilty of something. Literally, they thought this. They alerted his local police department in Lagos, Florida, to look into this degenerate person, and they essentially opened up a case on Mike Diana. They had one of their undercover cops order one of his magazines through the mail, and when he received it, he took that magazine to the state attorney, who thus deemed it obscene. And since it was mailed through the USPS, they filed charges against him for obscenity. Mike Diana was charged with obscenity in 1989, was on trial in 1994, and eventually jailed for his comic book zine that he made. And as part of his probation, it was deemed illegal for him to draw. I'm sorry. I thought we lived in America.
Yep.
This
That's
is what
nuts. That's
this is what happened to Mike Diana. So you think about the Sodi trials, pre-code horror, nobody went to jail. You think about the Sodi trials and pre-code horror, nobody was deemed they couldn't draw anymore. This person, 50 years later, 40 years later, is put in jail and probation and fined for his artwork and his comic book. This specific comic book, Superfly, was the first comic book that he made as he was mostly making underground zines. This is the first comic book he made and put out 1 year before his trial. So this sits at a very specific time in his history where this book came out while he was essentially to be convicted. He was already charged while he was essentially a criminal. Put out this comic book, and I think, in my opinion, thus making it an essential comic book of comic book history, given what happened to Mike Diana and the fact that this was his first comic book that he put out, and the time that it was put out at. So this is one of those books that comes about during the Copper Age, because it's really a signifier of the sort of boiling point culture wars that were happening at the time, and also how a comic book and an artist, can literally bring the FBI into someone's life. Pretty crazy story,
oh
and
yeah.
in my opinion, making it again one of the most important books of the modern era. But who knows about this necessarily?
I mean, I knew that there was maybe it was you mentioned it to me, or maybe I heard it recently. Maybe a combination of the two, but somebody said that somebody go into jail for their comics, and I was like, what? I was like, that can't be true, but here it is right in front of us. I mean,
Yeah, yeah. This is it. And the thing about this is that trailer we watched was a documentary that was available to stream on Amazon in 2018, up until about 2020, when the director pulled it from the streaming platform because he wanted to find an official distributor for physical media. And so he has yet to do that. So unfortunately, it's not able to stream on Amazon right now. But you think about this. I know you're a big Dave Stevens fan. You think about Dave Stevens. The And listen, this is where I said I had a hot take about Dave Stevens. I specifically find Dave Stevens not that interesting. I think he's very much a fan of Golden Age good girl art, and I understand that. But at the time he was making his work, I feel like that he could have. There was boundaries to be pushed, and he was kind of looking back to the past so hard. He was kind of, for me, in my taste, kind of living there. And when you had artists like Mike Dana or even Tim Vigil, who were really pushing the boundaries of taste, and what they were trying to bring to the world, I feel like Dave Stevens' work is interesting, but because of the documentary that came out, really pushed him over the edge into the mainstream. And I'm sure he had fans before that, but really blew up his books, as we saw happen this year. And I feel like Mike Diana here, who has a documentary out that came out actually before Dave Stevens did, and is actually an important figure in American history. For some reason, has been overlooked, and hasn't really got the due that his kind of flowers. I know it's not as popular as Good Girl Art. I know like Good Girl Art has like a very specific audience.
Right. I'm
But
one of them.
yeah, and I get it. You know, but and I think there is good girl art out there. I just think that Mike Diana really deserves a little more credit for his role that he has in comic book history. And I encourage people out there, if they can find the documentary, to watch it, because it really goes through sort of what happened to him. Neil Gaiman is in it. George A. Romero is in it. There's a lot of sort of heavy hitters in it. They're speaking on his behalf and why he's important. Yeah, this is probably one of the more consequential books on this list that I included. But again, feel free anybody to go check out this category on Key Collector and kind of see what else I talked about on here.
Now, is this book easy to find, Superfly, on eBay or no?
It comes up every once in a while. Sometimes actually you can find, because Mike Diana is very much alive. He's in his early 50s, and he's still making work all the time. Not making comic books, but he's mostly a fine artist now. So this is actually one of the few comic books that he's put out. But they pop up every now and then on eBay. You can get, like, when they do like maybe a fine copy goes for $50-$55. Key collectors prices aren't always the most current. I think most people know that, but you can find a copy for $50 in a fine condition. This is Tomb Tales, man. This is so gnarly. Do you know about this one?
No.
Speaking about EC, in the 90s, the original EC artists, as I mentioned here, Johnny Craig, George Evans, John Severin, Al Williamson, Joe Orlando, and Jack Kamen all came back to publish new art, new covers in 1997 through this publication arm called Cryptic Entertainment. They had this series, Cryptic Tomb Tales. There's 7 issues. Each of these artists gets their own original new cover. These were their original EC artists. And in my opinion, this issue number 2 by Jack Kamen is the most insane cover. Did you click into this and see what it is?
What do you mean? Like, click the?
Yeah. Just click that.
Yeah, that's ridiculous. Yeah, look at that.
You have to have a sense
the
of
same guy, Jack Kamen, who I think I have a Jack Kamen. I think this is it.
Yeah.
So he did Crime Suspense.
He did Crime Suspense. Yep.
Something like this. I think it's Jack Kamen.
Yep, that's him.
Okay, so
yeah, nice.
So he's doing covers in the 90s of this stuff right here.
Yeah, so this is as far as my research shows. I tried to officially confirm it, but it gets pretty weedy. But it looks like this is actually his last published cover before his death in the early 2000s. But this was a new work. This isn't a reprint. This isn't like something that was done and not ever published. A new work from Jack Kamen in 1997 from a very, very hard to find book. These books were like most Copper Age horror books, like your Crow book back there, all black covers, all black front, all black back covers. So hard to find a high grade. I saw this one. I think a fine copy on eBay was up for about $25. But that's a fine copy. We're talking like it's like a 5.5 probably. These books are very, very tough to find this edition. So again, these are the books that I'm after. I'm after books that are no 9/8 on the census, hard to come by, and very, very tough to find. So keep an eye out for that.
Yeah, these a lot of the ones like Victims 3 that we showed first, I went and got that book. A lot of the ones that you showcased.
That's a good one. Jim Balin. Oh man, it's a very solid one. This one right here.
And this is all the people that you're not talking.
What was that?
One thing I was gonna say is you're not talking high dollar, hundreds, thousands, whatever. You're talking $30 for some of these, and you think about it. They're hard to find. You're not gonna be able to find them. You may be lucky and find them in a long box somewhere, but
no way.
But
yeah,
more than
beat up.
they are. That's what I mean. So it's not very unlikely. So if you want it, you have to know somebody who has these that wants to get rid of them, or eBay them and find out when they come up for sale, or check Facebook Marketplace for someone who's getting rid of who had an affinity for these, because there's not many people. When I search long boxes, I don't ever really see crime suspense, any of these cult type classic books. I don't see Faust. I don't see Crow very often. It's all Image and Valiant and 90s Marvel scrap.
Yeah, these books, most of these books in a 9.8, I think would go. Actually, so Victims number 3, there was a 9.6 on eBay that sold for 150 when this list hit. That's the highest graded copy. So a 9.6 for 150. That means if you find a 9.8 of most of these books, I would say anywhere between 350 to 550. Depending on what book it is and who's out there, is quite possible. But again, we just don't know because there haven't been any. Um, this one is actually a new book that came out last year. This is a Kickstarter book. This book is insane, JP. Uh, I wish you could see it, but there were only uh, there's only about 300 copies of this out there. This is Angel Slayer. This is done by the lead singer of a death metal band, and this comic book is sort of like tied to some of the mythos that their music is about. But the artwork by this is done by an artist who usually does covers for death metal bands, and it's about this comic book is about a young boy whose family is murdered during the Christian Crusades and makes a deal with the devil to become a warrior, a goat warrior for Satan, and it's very very intense and super brutal. They're on the right side on my writing. I have the artist's name. I can't. I don't know how to pronounce it because maybe it's like Icelandic, maybe. But his Instagram towards the bottom there, if you keep scrolling down, yeah, Genlock Heatum is how you phonetically say his name. But on Instagram, you can see the work he does. This comic book is sort of like in the vein of underground copyright horror. It has that look, that black and white feel to it. Something that a lot of artists in the indies have is that they have this sort of like what you call graphomania. They love making marks. They love putting a lot of ink on the page. They love heavy line work. They really get down with what they're making.
And that's the only problem with some of those, the black and white, is that it's like reading some of the Faust books. I mean, the detail inside there, like Faust. I think it's Faust one. I was going through, and there was a scene. This guy and a girl together in bed, and then someone breaks down through the door and blows the guy away. Right?
Yeah.
And,
Yeah.
if it was in color, it'd have been so much more graphic. But being black and white, it's hard to differentiate exactly what's on the screen. Like this Angel Slayer, like this looks like a does look like death metal cover, and that was the 90s for Exodus and Slayer and Morbid Angel and you name them, and
Yeah.
it looks
Yeah.
just like
Exactly.
that. So it's sweet as hell. But you get
Exactly.
lost in the black and white because of the detail. But I'm not complaining. But I mean, I think it still looks dope as hell. But yeah, that's definitely a lot of detail in those.
Yeah, so this is a Kickstarter book and very very low print. I'm kind of like putting a spotlight on it. This is one of the last books I'm going to be sharing on my Instagram coming up in the next few days. I guess by the time this comes out, I may have already shared it. But
And you
just
have a copy of this?
I grabbed a copy because their Kickstarter just closed a few months ago for issue number 4. I came onto it kind of late, but I was lucky enough to get on just in time for them to get one of the new books. They have a few printings of number 1, but each print run is like 50 copies, so it's not very very huge at all. And there's really no difference between the printing, so it's really just if you just get a copy of the book, period. I did see on eBay recently that there was a set that sold for about $40, but that was like, it was up and it was gone in like a second. I mean, I think people are starting to see this because the band has its own following, the artist has his own following. And I think, as we saw with recently with like Mark Spears and his monsters, and sort of like what Kickstarter books can do. To me, this is one of those books for horror fans, for metal fans, for Copper Age fans. Even though this is a new book, people have it's people have started to see this a little bit, and I just want to put a more of a megaphone on it because I think it's a really really cool book. It's a super cool idea. It's a concept comic book, and it's fucking rare. So if you're interested in this, you could just Google the Kickstarter. Anybody out there listening who might be intrigued by this, just Google the Kickstarter. You can see what the issues look like. You can see some of the artwork. Go to Jinglot's Instagram page and see what he's working on because he's a really fascinating artist. This is his first comic book that he's done. Again, he usually did cover art for and posters for metal bands, but this is his first official comic book. So there's like a really important first there in terms of what he's doing as an artist. It's just a cool book. Keep an eye out. I hate to blow up my spot. I want more copies of this book. And I know letting people know about it, maybe might diminish my probability, but I think it's an important book. I think it's cool if you can find it. And to everybody out there who might be looking, if you beat me to it, great. But I'm hunting this one, and I'd love to get as many copies as I can because I think it's something that has some legs on it.
Well, fortunately for you, you won't have much competition. Unfortunately for our stream, we don't have the traffic that would infringe upon your ability.
Hey,
you never know. But lucky for us, unlucky for you. But hopefully, get another copy and no one impedes upon that. But these are all. I look at this list and definitely could go back and get that Superfly. I believe, like I said, I got the Victims #1. That Nightmare on Elm Street I look for when I'm hunting because I found Nightmares 1. But I won't find that 6th one because it's harder to find. But it's the one with the girl on the cover, so I think it's the second, not the second printing, but the second storyline of Nightmare on Elm Street. So again, these are ones that are hard to find, and Rohan and I have different ways of collecting. And, my room is covered in various things from Spider-Man to Image Comics to Good Girl Art to Silver Age, Golden Age, Copper Horror. I mean, it's all over the place. And Rowan's very specific on key books and Silver Age. And so we differ in that part of it. But then we had a recent discussion about Copper Age versus pre-code horror. And I don't have a whole lot of time left, but this is something maybe that we could talk about next time when you come on. But I feel, and you can, and he's not on here to defend himself, so sucks for him. But we had gotten to this discussion, pretty heavy discussion about how many, valuable Copper Age horror books there are versus valuable Golden Age books. And some of my argument is that, or how many iconic covers are there? And I guess when you get into the semantics of the word iconic, that kind of, these covers we're showing here, I find them to be iconic, but you wouldn't show these to your average person. And that was part of their argument that they would know this cover Razor, right? But to me, it looks like, look at that. That's savage. That's a hell of a cover right there. Is it iconic? Is that the right term to use? But Chamber of Chills 22 or your crime suspense story, people have probably seen these covers somewhere, whether it was used on some heavy metal album cover or a T-shirt, but someone has seen some of those Golden Age pre-code horror books before, just because there's been 80 years of them to appear on various entertainment pieces. Whereas these books are newer, but I find them to be just as iconic. But there's probably a better word to use for these type of covers, like especially the not as much the Superfly, but this Angel Slayer. I mean, that's ridiculous, this cover. I mean, so is it iconic? No, what's the word you would use? But I think that there's probably more tremendous covers like this compared to the great covers of the Golden Age. And it's just the fact that the pre-code horror just has that value that these ones don't yet have.
Yeah, it just takes time. It just takes time. And my thinking is that, look, we know pre-code horror has really come up in the past few years, but for a long time those books were known. What we're seeing now, and for the past maybe again past few years, is Bronze Age horror really had a big kick. Marvel Bronze Age horror first. Now DC Bronze Age horror is getting its due. Bernie Wrightson is getting his due, and that's fine. That's great. But those books were printed to the moon. There's a shit ton of those out there. They are hard to find in high grade. I'll give them that, and they do demand a dollar. When you do find them high grade, but it's just a matter of time because you go pre-code. Silver Age is kind of weird when it comes to horror. It kind of mostly moved to magazines in the Silver Age. But Bronze Age, you start to get back into comic books. What's after Bronze Age? The Copper Age. So it's really just a matter of time before those Bronze Age books are soaked in, and they're all kind of people have what they want, and people have graded what they need to grade. And then what's going to happen next? Well, people are going to go back and say, "Oh wow, what about these indies? What about these actual hard to find Copper Age horror books? Wow, we know horror sells. We know people. That's what really has seen an uptick even through this down market. Horror has not stayed steady. It's dipped as much as anything else has, but it's maintained people's interest. And I think that Copper Age horror is just next up on the list, and it's just a matter of time before these books do have their place. The Crow, because it's The Crow, and the movies already has established its place. Evil Ernie, because of his and Lady Death, because of their continued success and what they meant to people in the 90s. But for just like it was for me, those books are the entry point into the many layered layers of the indies, the undergrounds, and eventually these books that I've been writing about, and that I'll continue to beat my drum to and look for the most pristine copies that I can find of these tough to get books.
Yeah, and that's exactly what they are, tough to get. You're not going to find a pre-code horror book in a long box, but you can find them on eBay. These things you don't people don't know about them as much, and maybe that's the difference. Is my argument with Rohan about, do people know about these? But they're missing out because these books are hard to find. In my opinion, hard to find. They're great covers. Will they be iconic someday in the terminology of what iconic means? To people will be able to, any normal mainstream person can say that they've seen it before someday. And some things are just way too graphic for the normal person to see. And like what happened to Mike Diana, like I get that to a point, but that's why we live in this country, to do what we want to do. And it isn't, if it's not for everybody, don't watch it. Don't look at it, so not everyone needs to see it, but these are fascinating covers, as fascinating as the Golden Age books, and probably harder to find than the Golden Age books. There's probably more of these that are tremendous covers, we'll say, and great artwork than there are in Golden Age.
Yeah, for sure. And and again, thanks for letting me talk about these. For anybody who's interested in Copper Age horror, definitely check out Key Collector app and those categories if you got it. If not, just follow me on Instagram at Matrix Comix. I'm always sort of posting what I find. I'm not gonna lie, I do sort of gatekeep some of the comic books I find just until I can kind of see what I can get, and as long as I can. But sometimes I get too excited and I share too early, and I miss people. I miss out on certain books because people are now chasing them. But that's all good. I like to share the knowledge, and hit me up if anybody has any questions. I always love when people hit me up about a book they found, or they'll tag me in something, or ask me a question about a book. I really enjoy that, and I appreciate again coming on and let me talk about this craziness. And again, peace to Rohan. Sorry to miss you, dude. JP, thanks for your time, man, and reaching out and setting this up.
Yeah, no problem. I'm glad to have you on. We've been talking for a little while, and I was glad to have you on. I was looking forward to this one tonight to really get into these type of books. So I appreciate you coming on. hope to have you on again here soon. And for anyone, follow Matrix Comix on IG and share this with your friends so we can get that traffic up. And but Matrix, go grab that book now before the traffic gets hit up and it won't be available anymore.
Yeah, I'll keep an eye out. Good to see you guys, and we'll be in touch.
Yep, I appreciate it coming on. As I always say, you always believe in yourself. Peace out, everybody.